Naomi Gingrich. Naomi was formerly from Berlin. To make sure I get that right, before I lived in Ohio, I would have said Berlin.
That is true.
Berlin, Ohio. Raised on a farm in Ohio's Amish country, one of my favorite places to visit. And she honors her traditional Amish roots through recipes that are simple, soulful, and have been passed down for generations. And I'm a big fan. I grew up in Atlanta in the South, so I'm a big fan of soul food and soul food. Happy to get
Thank you so much. Thank you for coming. It's such a pleasure to be here. When Kimberly reached out to me about coming to the book fair, I was like, wow, somebody from Ohio is emailing me because I live in North Carolina now. And so I emailed her back and I said, are you sure you have the right person? Because I live in North Carolina now. But anyhow, it's such an honor to be here. My name is Naomi. Sorry, I'm on the tail end of laryngitis, but I hope you can still bear with me as I give you my little introduction. I did grow up in Amish country, close to Mount Hope, Ohio, if you're familiar with the area. My father was a conservative Mennonite pastor or bishop in a church, and my mom was a baker. She was known all around the community for her pies and her breads. And so I got my love of baking from her, and I got my love of farming and gardening from my father. And I always say that my father, one of his favorite sayings was, more is caught than taught. So he had me follow him all around our 50-acre farm, and I helped him milk the cows and, husk corn and plant the garden. And by being with him and helping him, that's how I learned. And then I did the same thing with my mom, helped her in the kitchen. Probably from the age of 3, I was standing at her side by the stove, stirring pots of pudding and just helping her make pies and getting my fingers in the dough. And I often look back on that time and wonder if my mom had any idea how much of an impact she was making on my life. And, now I have grandkids. And I think about that sometimes. One of them, my oldest is 7, my oldest grandchild is 7, and I have a 5-year-old and a 1-year-old grandchild. They're all boys so far. And I wonder sometimes when I'm working with them in the kitchen, if they will look back on that time and remember those times with me, just like I used to work with my mom in the kitchen. But from a young age, I learned the importance of food and just the traditions that can be so important to carry on to future generations. And so one of the things that was very important to our family was dinner around the table. And it wasn't a question of, I wonder if we're all going to have family dinner tonight. It was like we all showed up and there was dinner at the table. And so when I married my husband, that was one of the things I decided I wanted to carry into our family, was dinner at the table every night. And so now it's really sweet because my grandsons look forward to family dinner, and we try to get together at least once a week, our whole family, and just have family dinner. And so my 5-year-old grandson has already said, Mom, I think we should have family dinner Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday. So I love that. I think he's going to be the one that carries on that tradition because it means a lot to him already. So in thinking about why are food traditions important, and I'm sure that if you think back on your childhood, you could remember things that maybe your mom made or your grandma made that were consistent. Like without clockwork, you knew that on Christmas Day you were going to have this, or when Easter Sunday came, you would have this. And I own a bakery now with my daughter in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And we teach pie classes at the bakery. And so whenever I ask participants, like, where did you learn? Where did your love for baking or cooking come from? Invariably, they say it was a grandmother or an aunt that spent time with me in the kitchen. And looking back, I learned it from my mother. My grandmothers were pretty old when I was born. I was born like 12 years behind all the rest of my siblings. So I didn't have the privilege of knowing my grandmothers very much. But I learned from my mother, but now I feel like my kids learned more from my mom, probably than from me. And maybe that's how it is in a lot of homes, because it's hard work being a mom when your kids are all young, you know. But grandmothers, they have this time. They have this time on their hands. And it's so nice to now spend time teaching my grandboys how to.
Sweet.
Yeah, that's right. So why are food traditions important? And as I was thinking about this, I thought, it fosters communication. That's the first thing, like cooking and eating together. If you sit around the table, that invites conversation. And so it creates a bond within your family. And if kids know they can expect this every night for dinner, and I know in modern days, it's harder to strive for that. But I'd like to think if we could at least do it once a week or several times a week to gather your family together around the table for dinner. And so I asked my son, hard to believe, but my youngest son just turned 30. And I asked him, I said, so in thinking back to family dinner, like all the years that we had family dinner, what comes to your mind about them? And this was so sweet, I had to write it down so I could remember. He says, sometimes we get mad, sometimes we cried and had to work through stuff, and sometimes we laughed. But the dinner table was always a place I knew our family would connect, and I wouldn't sacrifice that for any. And so that was just a good reminder for me that those traditions I established early on in my marriage, that those were important and they were worth it. It was hard, wasn't always easy. But it was a season in my life where I could do that, where I could cook every night for my family. And I know now where a lot of wives are working, a lot of women are working outside of the home. That's harder to do. But it was a season in my life where I could do that. And I'm so grateful. And I know there's a lot of moms out there who do that today. They work a full-time job and they come home and put a great dinner on the table for their kids. And I really admire that. The other thing that food traditions can do is not only create strong family bonds, but they can create great memories that can resurface when you least expect it. My daughter and I were traveling to Savannah, Georgia, which is just like one of our favorite cities. And we were eating at this lovely restaurant, and so we ordered the dessert because it said on the menu, it said some kind of fancy naming dessert. And in the description, it said topped with tiny popcorn. And I thought, oh, that sounds so interesting. And when we took the first bite, my daughter and I both looked at each other and she's like, what does this remind you of? And I said, my mom's kitchen on Sunday night. And she said, yeah, it's Grandma's kitchen, because she always made popcorn for Sunday night, popcorn and grape juice. And it was this really tiny, buttery popcorn that she served. And this dessert was sprinkled with the tiniest little popped kernels of buttery popcorn. And instantly, when I took that bite, it transported me to my mom's kitchen. And so I often tell people who come to our bakery, I'm like, I want this food to remind you of your grandmother. I want this food to remind you of your aunt, or spark some family memory. And a couple of weeks ago, I was lamenting to my daughter that, our desserts are, home cooking, like what I grew up with in Amish country. But wouldn't it be so great to just have like a really fancy dessert sometimes in our pastry cake? And she's like, well, that's true, Mom, but we are not a French, bakery like the one down the street. And so I literally got up from the table with that conversation with my daughter, and I walked through our dining room, and this young couple in their 30s stopped me. And they said, excuse me, you're the owner, right? And I said, yeah. And they said, just want to tell you that we ate this piece of cake and it immediately reminded us of our grandmother. And I nearly burst into tears tableside because it was a humble piece of cake, nothing fancy, no French pastry, but it had taken them straight back to their grandmother's table. And I said, you know what? That is the highest form of compliment that you could ever give me. Thank you. So that's a reminder for all of you too. It doesn't have to be the fancy things that we make that we think, oh, my kids will always remember this. But it can be just the simple, consistent, delicious things that you make on any given night of the week that your kids will remember and maybe make someday as well. So communication, eating around the table, food creates lasting memories. And also it builds like a sense of continuity. So think about the things like we talked earlier about maybe what your family did for Christmas. Like, did you decorate cookies or did you always have an Easter ham or things like that? And special meals for holidays can just be so special for your family and your kids to think of. And at my house growing up, we had a special tradition of always when we had Sunday lunch. My father was the bishop of our church, and so this seems kind of a weird tradition now looking back because he already was the minister of the church and had a lot on his plate. But it was also common in our church that if there were any visitors there that day, guess where they went for lunch? To the preacher's house for lunch. And so, but my mom was a great cook, so I loved helping her in the kitchen. But she had beautiful blue willow dishes. And so similar to the one that's on the cover here. I'm so partial to those. I collect them now. But she always let me set the table with the blue willow dishes for company. And all other times they stayed in her cupboard. And so now when we opened our bakery, we serve our desserts on blue willow dishes because it's part of my heritage. It's how I can pass on my tradition. And guests feel so special when they come in and see this beautiful pastry on a vintage blue willow plate. And so that was something that was a tradition from my heritage that I can now share with others. So one of the things that helped me with creating this book was I wanted to pass on our cultural heritage of food for other people and just have a place where I could keep all of the recipes together in one place. So it's not like I'm this great recipe creator. These are recipes that my cousins, my aunts, my grandmother, my mother collected over the years. And it's just food that I grew up eating at church potlucks or Sunday lunch, like Sunday church potlucks or reunions or family gatherings. They're simple recipes, but they're delicious. And I think that if you think back in your family history, you could think of some great recipes as well. And I was talking to some young girls out at the table. They looked like maybe they were 10 or 12. And they told me how they love to bake and that they've been baking with their grandmother. And I said, make sure you get her recipes. While you still have your grandmother, make sure you get those recipes and write them down because someday you'll be so glad you did it. And if you notice inside the cover, the front and back, you'll see a picture of some of the recipes. These were recipes that were in my mother's recipe file, which there's not many of those out there in this digital age anymore. But now I treasure them so much, the handwritten recipes. Some of them were challenging, like no directions whatsoever. Just add enough flour till it looks right. Like seriously, someone said that. But it's just still so precious to have those. And so I encourage you to write down those family recipes because that can be how you pass on the culture of your family to the next generation. Also, in thinking about those food heritages and what's important, passing on or cooking with your kids and your grandkids, it can instill the values in them that you have personally. Like my 7-year-old grandson, he already knows that when we cook dinner, we get our meat and our vegetables from the farmer's market. Like it's very rare that we get it from the grocery store. Now, when I was growing up, we got it from the garden and we butchered our own beef and, gathered eggs from the chicken house. We live in the city now. So, which is funny because I heard him also 7 years old saying to someone the other day, yeah, I was raised in the country. I was raised in Amish country. And I looked at him and I said, you weren't raised in Amish country. You're a city boy. And he's like, no, because you were, and you're my grandmother. So basically that means I was. So he has some things to learn about that. But he already knows that when we cook from scratch, it takes longer. So we're teaching him patience, teaching him that you can't just stick something in the microwave and it's done in 10 minutes. That creating good food and good recipes and cooking a delicious meal to eat around the table sometimes takes patience and time, but in the end, it's worth it. So, the other thing is that it can teach children valuable life skills like meal planning, which I'm not the greatest at, but it can help them to know just how to get around in the kitchen. Like, if I would not have had that experience of helping my mom in the kitchen, I think it would have been harder for me to just know how to cook for my husband, how to cook for my family. And I know a lot of people learn that after they're married. But I'm so grateful that I learned that at my mom's side and that we were able to cook together and do all these things. And hi, come on in. So the last thing is that the process of cooking together can foster creativity in your kids or your grandkids. Like, I might not cook my food exactly how my mom did, but her technique of little bit of this, little bit of that, not necessarily measuring everything, helped me to be creative in how I cook today. And I think has inspired my kids to do that as well. So in thinking back about all the things, food traditions, gathering around the table, heritage recipes that have been passed down, I would love to hear from you, if you wouldn't mind, if you would share with me, what is a dinner tradition maybe that you have in your family? Is there like a favorite recipe that your mom or your grandmother made that you remember? Or what kind of foods did you eat growing up? Does anybody want to share about that?
Well, I'll share. My grandmother was full-blooded Italian. Her parents off the boat. So they had a restaurant. So she was an excellent cook. My great grandparents, my grandmother, very good cooks. And like you said, my mother, I didn't learn as much from her. I learned from my grandparents. So every Sunday, we had pasta of some sort, whether it was lasagna or spaghetti or whatever, homemade brejol, meatballs, the entire family.
That sounds so good.
It was crazy, but I miss it. I miss it. So it was wonderful. And her recipes, like you said, she never wrote them down. I tried to get her to write things down. She's like, oh, put them in your hand. See
Yeah,
how-
yeah, just all it feels right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Here, get your hands in it. And yeah,
yeah.
the bread dough is done when it, yeah, okay. But I wouldn't trade that for anything. And I have 2 boys and they both know how to cook.
That's great.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
So
And do you feel like you've passed along some of that, or she has?
I
passed
have,
along?
we all have passed down. Right now, our lives are very busy. And the only meal we're all home for is Sunday breakfast.
Hey,
But
but
we're-
that works at least
Yeah.
once a day. Yeah,
Yeah, once a week. Yeah, we,
or once a week, right?
yeah, yeah.
That's
So-
wonderful.
So we all are there for Sunday breakfast.
I love that.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
I have a quick question first. I was kind of curious. So we had the problem in our family is that she had wrote some of her recipes down. I was curious if this happened to you at all. She'd say like 1 cup or 1 tablespoon. And then we found out the cup she was using was a cup and a half because it was an old mug.
Oh,
Here are all the recipes. We're like, why are they not turning out?
that's
Here are
funny.
the little tablespoon that someone carved, and it was like 3 tablespoons. And so like here she's like half a tablespoon. We're like, it's not enough. And like so we were having that issue
Right.
for handwriting, but it was like a cup. I'm like, man, it's like so dry. And here hers was like this huge cup. But that was my great grandma. But I was just curious if you ever encountered that. But I
Yeah,
don't think that I
for trial and error
Yeah.
when you're making old recipes.
But something that I always enjoyed is that my grandma, she was always cooking. She was also kind of that by sight and sound, and she was always like, you have to get the right ingredients.
Mhm.
And my mom is kind of also that way, is that she goes, it's not going to taste the same. So we learned growing up that you either get it from the farm or you go to like the Amish bulk food store. And she goes, it's not going to taste right. And then growing up, I would be like, well, why isn't it mine tasting right? And my grandma's like, well, what did you use? And that's something that I remember that I'm now teaching my niece who's 4 how to preschool.
Yeah.
So we go to like the farm and we'll go to Amish bulk food store and get our stuff. And she always is so excited, but she's always the one sitting there like, is it ready yet? And I'm like, yes, it's time. Like, it's not, you don't go to the store. Like we went and got a bunch of vegetables one time when she was like 2. And she's like, it's not, like, that's not spaghetti. And I'm like, we have to make the sauce, you know, kind of like that. But that's something that I learned. It was like, it's hard work, but you have to get the right
Yeah,
ingredients.
for sure, vegetables taste better, pulled
Yeah.
fresh from the garden than they do from the grocery.
Or like homemade vanilla. Like I never understood why the cookies didn't taste great. Yeah. But
For sure. Thank you for sharing. Anybody else? We're talking about dinner traditions that you have had in your family, favorite foods that you remember eating growing up.
I mean, I'm Italian too. So, my great aunts, my grandpa and his siblings, their parents were immigrants, and we have a sauce recipe in our family that's over 100 years old.
That's amazing.
And, yeah, I mean, my great aunt for Christmas always had everybody over to her house. And
That's
so
the
the
best.
entire family and all 6 of them, the children had families, so there were a lot of kids, all the cousins were there. And, yeah, I mean, like, even when I was a kid, 3rd generation of doing this, there was always pasta, there was always pizza. She made homemade pizzelles. It
That's
was
so
it-
lovely.
It was just crazy. And there was this thing that happened about 2 years ago. There was a woman at our church, who was older, who was Italian, and she cooked, fellowship lunch for everybody.
Oh
Like
my,
all her,
that's
all
amazing.
of her Italian recipes. And it was like that. It was like getting transported back to my great aunt's house. And,
That's so beautiful.
my great aunt's passed on, somebody else owns the house now, but it's like for an hour, I got to be back there. So that
That's
was such a
so
special
wonderful.
experience.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you for sharing. Anybody else?
You have a recipe for ginger cookies,
I
not ginger snaps, ginger cookies.
So there is a recipe for ginger cookies, and if you can either roll them out and cut them out and bake them a little longer and they get crispy. Or you can not roll them out and just roll them into a ball, dip them in sugar and bake them, and then they're soft. So it's how you bake them or how you roll out or not roll out as to whether they get snappy or soft.
My great grandmother made ginger cookies all the time, they were about that thick, they're soft.
Soft, yes,
My mother likes,
crunchy.
yeah, so she was never interested, but I loved them. Until, my great grandfather died when I was 3, so put it before then, because then she got the house on them. But I loved them, and I looked everywhere for a replica, and the only place I ever found any cookies like that was Lancaster, PA, and Amish Baking.
That's so interesting.
And it was like, Grandma's cookies, so I
Oh.
walked and took them home, because the mom said, yeah, there's a Deli cookie Grandma used to make.
Oh.
She just doesn't like it.
It's so interesting. I'm staying at my mother-in-law's house in Amish country, and when I got there last night, she opened up a tin of ginger cookies, and it's just like that, the soft, fat, squishy. Yeah, that's awesome. So, we have just a few minutes. Does anyone have any questions?
I have a question,
Okay.
because I love to cook, love to bake, love to eat. But pie is my nemesis. If you
Yeah.
had one wonderful secret about pie dough, what would it be?
Well, it's in here.
Oh, okay.
I was actually gonna talk about this and I forgot. So like I said, I give pie classes at our bakery. And I think making a good pie is a lost art. And so I learned that my mother's side, she was fanatical about her pie dough. Number one tip is don't overhandle the dough. But I was always confused by that because I thought it meant initially when you were mixing the butter, and we use all butter in our pie dough. I thought it was when you were mixing the butter and the flour together. So I just would barely mix it, and then I pour in the liquid and it was just a big mess. But the secret is to not overmix the dough is when you pour the liquid in. And so the flour and the butter do need to be incorporated a little bit, should still be some chunks of butter. But it's after you add the liquid that you do just a few little turns and then just smush it all together. But I have a step-by-step guide of how to make really good pie dough. So there you go. So I have each recipe has a how-to that starts with a how-to section. So how to make pie dough, how to frost a layer cake. A lot of people ask us at the bakery because I make layer cakes like my Aunt Edna. She was like known throughout the county for her tall layer cakes. And when we started our bakery in 2017, there was nobody in our city that did layer cakes. Like it was all just sheet cakes. And so now when people walk in our bakery and then see the tall 3-layer, layer cakes, they're like, wow, that's so wonderful. But a lot of people aren't familiar with how to frost them. So I have chapter 3, I think, or 2, starts with how to frost a layer cake. So each chapter has its own how-to section. So thank you for asking about that. It's got my secrets in here for answering this.
What's the difference between that book and that book?
So this is the limited edition. It has it's signed and numbered, and basically it's just a fancier version, kind of like a coffee table book, but it's signed and numbered on the inside, has the gold marking ribbons. This is more like just kitchen friendly, I like to say. It has the binder here, which means that everything lays flat. But the content is the same. The other cool thing about these books is that I included stories. So I'm a storyteller at heart. So it has stories of how I grew up in Amish country on the farm. I taught in an Amish school, which that was a pretty amazing experience because they normally only have Amish teachers, but I was a Mennonite, young Mennonite girl, and they took a chance that I wouldn't pollute the kids' minds, and they hired me as their teacher. But that was probably the most challenging thing I've ever done in my life, to teach all 8 grades in one classroom and fire up the wood burning furnace in the winter. So I talked a little bit about that in here. So the book also has stories. It's not just recipes. But I think my time's probably off. So does anyone else have a burning question?
What's the name of your bakery?
It is Louie and Honey's Kitchen. And that's my 7-year-old grandson. His name is Louie. And he calls me Honey Ma.
Oh.
Instead of Grandma, he calls me Honey Ma. And when we started our bakery, it was called Lavender and Honey Kitchen. Well, then some small coffee shop in California decided to sue us because they had named their coffee shop Lavender and Honey Coffee Shop in California. So obviously that didn't work. We didn't have to pay any money, but we did have to change our name. So we already had the logo LHK. So I was thinking one day, I was like, and my oldest daughter helps me in the bakery, and Louie is her son. So I thought we could keep the LHK and say Louie and Honey's Kitchen. And it's a little bit more personal, but that's where the name comes from. And we're in Winston-Salem in North Carolina. And our specialty is our Amish Senate rolls. And we have people who drive from many states to get them. So if you're ever on your way to the beach, we are on the way to the Outer Banks or North Carolina beaches, or people from Holmes County stop in on their way to Florida. We're just about 40 minutes off of 77. Stop in at the bakery. you can stop by my table out there and I'll give you a coupon that you can get a free cynical when you come to me.
Oh,
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate
Yeah,
it.
favorite recipe in the book.
Favorite recipe in the book, probably the cinnamon roll recipe. Yeah, I love cinnamon rolls. There's 2 recipes in there. One is from my Amish cousin and it's called potato rolls. Those are very similar to what we serve at our bakery. And then there's another one that has sour cream in it, but they have mashed potatoes in the toe, which
Okay.
makes them so delightful.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.